is. The Ford
Oh,
dealership was in the big brick building on the other side.
boy, that's interesting. That
All the
that
Ford.
the angle of that photo then
Yeah.
must have been taken.
Yeah, but you can see this
The brick.
the
Yeah.
brick.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's where the
Okay.
Ford dealership was.
All right.
And then Evan Jones Tire Store was in that same building.
Okay.
Oh, he had it on. He had it over there right beside what's now Three Tigers, and then he had it over there. He had it at one time or another on both sides of North Prospect.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody taking that picture must have been facing south.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's.
Okay. Janet.
Well, there's Janet.
Howard. You know Howard Long? He's the director, the first ever director of the Licking County Historical
No, I
Society,
do not.
right here.
No, no. I've never joined. I say I've never joined the Licking County Historical Society.
Mm-hmm.
It's one more thing that.
Yeah.
So I never bothered.
Hello. Hi.
So we shall see. I think Butch Curtis was a year behind me in high school, and I haven't knowingly seen him in 50 or 60 years.
Right.
Obviously, I've seen him and didn't realize I had.
Yeah.
But
accepted a ride and put them in someone's back seat. I emailed. Anyway, I knew I was going to get a
just you, or are you just a Granville?
I'll just start in.
Start.
So maybe wait. If there's anybody else coming in, one more, two more, one more. Oh, I think she's the head of the Denison Museum.
Oh, really?
Hello?
Hello.
Nope, no, that's for, nope. Is there somebody there that I want? Yeah. It's
Okay.
warm in here.
I know. Yeah, I know.
You wanna open it? Want to open the door again, or you good? It's up to you.
Maybe you could open the side one again, or the two side ones. Okay, well, one more, Anne.
Ann, better let Ann in.
Somebody in this gym?
Is this your water bottle?
Oh, yes.
Okay, yeah, nobody is, yeah. Thank you.
No, but nobody wants to be that close to us.
What did you see? Right out here.
Well, get the show on the road. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I almost said good evening because this is a rarity, having a Saturday afternoon program. So welcome to the Granville Historical Society. Okay, there isn't any. I'm just going to have to project. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, we haven't figured that out. Yeah, we're going to try our best to project. So, okay. The Rotary Club of Granville, which is partnering with the Historical Society, agreed to talk about the history of the Granville business scene this month as part of the our community's observance of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Our gargantuan task, I and fellow Rotarians Rob Drake and Dave Rutledge agreed to take on the topic, starting, of course, with Granville's founding year, 1805. We'll start out discussing generalities since sources about the downtown business district early on are thin until maybe the mid-1800s. And of course, there wasn't much of a downtown there at first anyway. We found to be very helpful Bushnell's as sources, Bushnell's History of Granville, Ohio, William T. Utter's Granville, the Story of an Ohio Village, Jacob Little's History of Granville, issues of the Granville Times, and various looking back articles housed in the Historical Society's archives to get some information from the 1800s and early 1900s. Rob Drake will begin, and I will follow up. Rob and I are both former presidents of the Rotary Club and former presidents of the Historical Society Board, so we figured that's all we needed to say about that stuff. So, Rob, go ahead and get us started.
Thanks, thanks, Chuck. I am sort of the venerable one, which is why I got the 19th century, and Chuck got the 20th century.
Oh,
what follows is not intended as a comprehensive study, and you can understand why if you, after we've talked, you can look at the pictures. There have been far too many businesses in Granville for us to try to list all of them, and so we have not done that, but rather this is a sampling of what businesses early Granville had to offer. The focus is on the village itself, although some notable township enterprises are also included. Now, the first business in Granville was, of course, farming. The early settlers from New England and Wales needed to feed their families. Excuse me. So even before the first New Englanders arrived, they had sent an advance party in the summer of 1805 to plant a corn crop for their early sustenance. But those who settled here came from areas in New England and in Wales where some items not easily made at home or requiring specialized skills were available for purchase. So businesses sprang up quickly to fill those needs. In 1805, one of those 5 men in the advance party was a blacksmith, an obvious need at that time, and likely one of the first Granville businesses. By 1806, there were 3 sawmills in operation as settlers began to erect homes and barns in the forest. By 1807, wood was being made into dishes, yokes for oxen, plows, and chairs. In 1808, visitors were arriving, and Deacon Timothy Rose opened parts of his new home at the southwest corner of Pearl and Broadway as a tavern and inn. 1809 saw the first bricks being manufactured for sale. They sold for $5 a thousand. Barrels were needed, and in 1810, the first cooper set up shop. Corn was hard to transport, but whiskey was easier. And with those new barrels available, a distillery opened in 1811. More distilleries followed, and perhaps because of the quantity of whiskey consumed locally, 1811 also saw the second physician open practice. Production of potash, made from wood ashes and important for the making of soap, began in 1812, the same year that the first shoemaker came to Granville. 1816 saw a grist mill, a carding mill for wool, but the big news that year was Granville's first, and perhaps last, industrial enterprise, the Granville furnace. The Granville furnace was an iron furnace located in the valley of Clear Run, just east of today's Maple Grove Cemetery and north of Raccoon Creek. You can easily see the site from the bike path. What was needed for iron production was plentiful wood to make charcoal, water power for a mill wheel to power the bellows. This came from a mill pond north of the Newark Granville Road on what is now the Denison Golf Course, and iron ore, a low grade of which, bog iron, was obtainable in sufficient quantity from creek beds west of the village. The furnace made iron tools and cooking implements and operated for about 20 years. A stove made at the furnace is in this museum. The 1820s saw grist mills and 2 tanneries in operation. That decade was a very busy one for new enterprises, including the cutting of tombstones, boiling of salt, and the attempted manufacture of oil from castor beans, flaxseed, and hickory nuts. All these efforts to make salt and oil failed. There was a steadier demand for the tombstones. The 1820s also saw tobacco being raised, clocks being manufactured and sold for $15 each, a wagon and furniture factory north of town, a haberdasher making hats, and a cheese operation. Merchants first sold goods from the back of wagons, but a store with a stock of goods was opened as soon as 1808, and in 1816 alone, 3 stores opened. Initially, these stores would be a room in a home. By 1825, the first pharmacy opened, and stores, some in structures built for the purpose, were fairly numerous. All this mercantile activity gave rise to thoughts of local banking, and local men twice tried to open banks under the charter of the Granville Alexandrian Society, a corporation licensed by the state of Ohio and originally intended to provide a local library. Both these banking ventures failed quickly, first in 1817 and again in 1837. The most lasting mark of these efforts was the construction of the stone building, which is now the front part of this museum. In a 1950 talk, Marguerite McCollum noted that in Granville there may have been as many as 17 separate inns during the first 50 years of the 19th century, with up to 5 operating at a time. Among those was the Buxton Inn, which opened in 1812. And we mentioned Deacon Rose's place earlier. The Buxton Inn is Granville's oldest business. Much of the credit for the growth of the downtown business district in the 1820s was due to the efforts of Lucius Maurer, Granville's wealthiest and most successful businessman at that time. Maurer built 2 small stores in the downtown area and then partnered with Anthony P. Pritchard, who operated a drugstore in a small building at the northwest corner of Broadway and North Prospect Street. Maurer bought Pritchard out, and in 1830 built on that corner the building now occupied by Kussmaul Gallery. Maurer also built the imposing brick home still standing just east of the Avery Downer House. Into the 1840s, growth of the Granville merchant class became more evident along Broadway as follows. The Pritchards appear to have been a strong entrepreneurial group offering the following goods and services: proprietary medicines of any value, books, both classical and school, surgical instruments, and choice wines and spirits, pure and unadulterated for medicinal purposes only. Other members present at this time were D. Humphrey, a dealer in dry goods, groceries, and hardware at the west end of Broadway; S. Wright, with a large stock of dry goods and groceries on the south side of Broadway; excuse me, S. Reed, a dealer in dry goods, groceries, hardware, books, and shoes; A. E. Rogers, attorney at law, whose office was over Wright's dry goods store; and H. R. Green, manufacturer of saddles, bridles, and harnesses. Was there ever a spa in Granville? Why, indeed. 1852 saw the founding of a unique business on the north side of East Broadway, the Granville Institute of Hydrotherapy, more popularly known as the Water Cure. It continued to treat patients into the 1880s. Information from the Ohio State Gazette Business Directory in 1860 and 1861 lists a number of businesses and professionals from Granville, including ministers, cabinet makers, lawyers, candle makers, educators, painters, carpenters, and physicians. 1866 saw a gunsmith, a photographer, an architect, a carriage maker, and a confectioner. The Granville Times weekly newspaper was established in 1880 by Mr. Church, then sold to Mr. Downs in 1885, the same year in which Mr. Kussmaul became a partner. Kussmaul at the time also managed the Granville Opera House, which had a seating capacity of 800 to 900. It had a fine stage, and under Kussmaul's leadership has drawn the highest class of entertainment, a directory stated. More businesses continued to pop up on Broadway, South Main, and Prospect. There were more dry goods stores, barber shops, jewelry stores, planing mills, a lumber yard, banks, harness repair, a couple of new restaurants on the south side of Broadway, and the Buxton House, which we still know as the Buxton Inn. One development in the late 19th century that would have an impact for exactly 100 years was a village council vote in 1874 to ban the sale of alcoholic beverages in the village. Members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union sought the legislation after a decades-long effort to close down taverns and bars. Another new development in 1890 was the arrival of the interurban electric rail car, which offered transportation to and from Newark and from Newark to cities such as Columbus and Zanesville, all of which alarmed some Granville merchants. As Granville entered the 20th century, there were still many businesses showing ties to its past, but changes were beginning to come. In the area of transportation, it still boasted at least 3 blacksmiths, a livery stable, and a harness shop. But just north of the Methodist Church was a bicycle shop, and the railway station at the foot of Main Street boasted a station agent who was also the telegraph operator. Near the railroad on the west side of Main Street was a lumber yard, and on the east side was a mill. A gas company office heralded the arrival of natural gas to replace coal and wood as a source of heat, and a telephone exchange had been established to speed communication. The downtown had at least 3 groceries, a candy shop, a bakery with cookies for a penny, 1 restaurant, 1 bank, and hardware, dry goods, and drugstores. The village had 4 doctors, 3 barber shops, an undertaker, a millinery shop, and a meat market. It even had a business called a saloon, although with the sale of intoxicating beverages being forbidden, this dark building seems to have been a pool hall. Moving into the 20th century, there were 2 incidents, both of the major fires that changed the landscape downtown. At 6 a.m. on February 1st, 1927, a fire was discovered in the Wilson building on the south side of East Broadway in the middle of the block. The fire was discovered in the rear of the student restaurant, likely the Hut, which was located at the eastern end of the structure. The Granville Times reported that the Newark Fire Department was called to assist and got it under control. Damages were estimated at $50,000, the equivalent of $1 million today. It did not take long for a new building to rise from the ashes, which is the dark red brick 1-story structure we know today that houses an art gallery, a real estate office, a dental office, and a Chinese restaurant. Occupying those 4 spaces starting in July 1827 were 2 previous occupants, the College Hut and the Kroger grocery store, in addition to a new men's clothing and furnishing shop and a Western Union telegraph office. 10 years later, the neighboring Johnson Follett Owen building, which had been destroyed in the same fire, was replaced with a brand new 2-story brick building housing the telephone company, which still stands today. A disaster similar to the 1927 fire occurred in 1982 on the western corner of the same block, where the century-old Opera House went up in flames. In 1980, the steeple had been struck by lightning and burned, but the building survived. In 1982, it was completely destroyed. It had housed a dentist's office, American gift shop, another antique shop, and Granville Township offices. The Opera House was not replaced, and the corner lot on which it stood is now the Opera House Park. Now, Chuck will continue our business story into the 20th and 21st centuries. Chuck?
Thank you, Rob. Back to 1930, a business directory published in the Granville Times showed many changes downtown, especially on North Prospect Street, where the two-story brick Warner building had arrived. The business directory still listed one blacksmith shop, but in 1931, it was announced that it would be closed, leaving the village without a blacksmith for the first time in its 126-year history. But the horseless carriage had taken over, and as a matter of fact, the business that replaced the blacksmith was a service garage, automobile service garage. Granville had a Ford dealership at the corner of Prospect and College Streets in the Warner building. There were 4 filling stations, 3 garages for repairs, and a tire shop. The interurban was gone, widely believed to be a casualty of the automobile. Meanwhile, travelers could stay at the Buxton Tavern or the Granville Inn, and in addition to being able to dine there, they could choose from among 4 restaurants and tea rooms, 2 candy stores, and a bakery. They could be entertained by movies at the Opera House or in billiard parlors. Medical needs were addressed by 6 physicians, including Granville's first woman doctor, Geraldine Crocker, and 2 dentists. Pets and farm animals had access to a veterinarian, and there were now 2 funeral homes, both of which offered ambulance services. And still during the 1930s, retail shops downtown included 8 grocery stores, including an A&P, a Kroger, and a Red and White, and 2 meat markets. Granville had hardware stores, dry cleaning, clothing for men and women and children, 2 jewelers, its own newspaper, 5 barbers, and 3 plumbers. Ohio Power's advertisements said that it made it possible for Granville to, quote, walk in the light, drink water pumped from wells 200 feet deep, and cook, radio, and ice with electricity. Now that was progress. All in all, 86 separate merchants and stores are listed in the 1930 directory. By 1940, several new categories of businesses emerged. These included beauty shops, an antique shop, cigar stand, electric appliance store, and a radio service shop. The number of groceries had shrunk to 6, but the number of gasoline stations had increased to 7. Fords were no longer available, but Hudson Williams had established Hud's Chevrolet on East Elm Street in the building that is now Elm's Pizza. Including Hud's, there were 4 garages for service. The number of merchants advertising themselves as confectioners had risen to 3, which might explain why the number of dentists had also increased to 3. And was Granville healthier? There were now only 4 physicians practicing. There were 2 drugstores and 3 florists. The total number of merchants and businesses listed in the 1940 directory decreased to 76, however. The only merchant who placed a photograph in his advertisements at this time was John D. Evans, whose funeral home was on South Pearl Street. 1955 saw several additions. Roland Thompson had opened a photography studio on Broadway, and Harry Kaler had a 5 and 10 cent store on North Prospect, soon to move to Broadway. The number of groceries on Broadway had dropped to 4. But Gregory Hardware, where CVS Pharmacy is now, added a toy store, and Denison had moved its alumni offices there. 4 filling stations and 1 garage took care of the automobile population. Aileen Duncan said that her jewelry and gift items were available both in Granville and Palm Beach. 1 beauty shop and 3 barber shops kept the community looking sharp. Most of the businesses from 1940 remained unchanged. Another factor which remained unchanged was that all, or almost all, of the proprietors of these varied businesses lived in and were a part of the Granville community. It could be that up to the 1950s, the town was bustling with foot traffic on Saturdays well into the evening, particularly with folks from the country coming in for their weekly shopping. This self-sustaining nature of Granville business was to continue into the early 1960s. By that year, Granville had 5 grocery stores, 6 gas stations, a stockbroker, insurance agents, the 1 automobile dealership, a hardware store, a real estate agent, a lawyer, 1 bank, a lumber yard, a mill, and a stockyard, among many other businesses. Entertainment could be found in a pool hall, a bowling alley, which was in that Warner building, and a movie theater in the Opera House. And almost all the businesses were still operated by local residents. But the convenience represented by the opening of retail shopping centers, including Southgate in 1960 and what is now Heath, and the increased ease of shopping elsewhere began to hint at a decline in downtown retail places. Presenting another challenge for downtown was the arrival of the new Ohio 1637 bypass, 4-lane bypass, in late 1962. There were mixed reports about its receptions by merchants, with several recollections of opposition to the new route. However, a Newark Advocate headline prior to the highway's completion found support from a number of businesses and the Granville Businessmen's Association. One business person who claimed her business was adversely impacted by the bypass was Sally Jones Sexton, owner of the Granville Inn, who said foot traffic had slowed dramatically after the bypass opened. That prompted her in 1963 to try to end that local prohibition to pass a local option issue for allowing serving of alcoholic beverages at the inn, but that effort failed, as it did again in 1966 and 1970. Another significant change in 1968 was the raising of the 3-story Gregory Hardware building, originally the Hotel Granville, when it was built in the late 1800s. And that was replaced by Bennett's Service Center. Some distinctive business trends had emerged starting in the mid-20th century. We mentioned the gas stations, most of them either right downtown or within a couple of blocks. But the last downtown service station was, in fact, Bennett's, which closed in 1998. During the 70s, there were still 4 groceries, 3 downtown, but Welsh's Grocery closed in 1977, and Sargent's Market followed suit in 1978 when he retired, leaving only the new Granville IGA, which had opened in late 1969 on South Main Street. Fuller's Market remained downtown, however, but it was the last downtown grocer to close in the mid-90s after some 50 years in business. And the changing nature of Granville was shown by the fact there were now 5 banks which started during the 1980s. Back to the wet-dry alcohol issue in the village, a local option issue for both the Granville and Buxton inns passed in 1974 after a century of being dry, which would later have an impact downtown that we see today. Meanwhile, a trend in the business community that had quietly begun as early as the 1950s took off during the 70s, the antique shop era. From the 50s through the 1990s, there were as many as 22 such stores of various sizes in operation in and outside of town, and Granville advertised itself around the state as an antiques mecca, highlighted in an article in Columbus Monthly magazine in 1977. But the arrival of huge antique malls around the state and the internet, which started during the 1990s, were said to be key factors in the end of this era. For several years during the 60s through the 80s, it could be said that Granville had 3 gift shops, Cunard's, Aileen Duncan's, and the 5 and 10. The gift shop arts and crafts store trend really took off during the 90s, possibly an outgrowth of the antiques era. Koosmal Gallery, Hare Hollow, Greystone's Country House, Sensibilities, Granville Cherry Traditions, and later Green Velvet were mainstays during the 1990s and into the 21st century. However, many of these shops seemed to disappear by the time of the Great Recession from 2008 to 2010. The only survivors of that era downtown are Kussmaul Gallery and Green Velvet. During the 1970s and 80s, downtown Granville seemed like a ghost town, especially during evenings, compared to how busy it was up through the 1960s, especially on Saturdays. This was taken in, I believe, 1975. There were some Russian journalists who came and did an article on Granville to be published over in the Soviet Union. But two businesses that appear to have sparked new life into East Broadway, along with a third restaurant already present, were the Village Coffee Company and Witt's Frozen Custard. The latter two both relocated from North Prospect Street to Broadway. Village Coffee arrived in September 2001 and immediately got permission from the village to set tables out front for a sidewalk cafe look. Prior to this, Victoria's Parlor, with a downtown presence since 1983, already had been putting tables out, at least during the 90s. Then, in early 2003, Witt's had arrived on North Prospect, but by the end of the year, moved to the former Hare Hollow space on Broadway and also put tables out. Early on, there were often lines out the door at Witt's, a testimonial to its impact downtown. In ensuing years, more restaurants put out sidewalk cafe tables, as you see here every summer, and drawing considerable foot traffic, especially during the evenings. The final trend, still in vogue, is the, oh, sorry. Okay. The final trend in vogue is the explosion of restaurants. Prior to this, there were as many as 3 or 4 downtown at a time, not counting the restaurants at the Granville and Buxton Inns. But now there are 9 downtown, including the Granville Inn and Elm's Pizza a block off, and 3 more on South Main Street, plus Snapshots just outside the village on Weaver Drive. And you have to think that now that Granville was wet, and the number of liquor licenses is based on population, restaurants became more profitable enterprises. And we can't forget Wendy's and Bob Evans out on Cherry Valley Road. Those are in the village as well. That's 16 dining establishments, and maybe there'll be one more if an eventual new owner of the Buxton Inn reopens the restaurant there. To conclude, an article Rob Drake wrote 4 years ago for the Historical Times, the Society's quarterly publication, described the downtown business district in 1960, store by store, when his family moved here from Texas. He concluded that piece with the poignant observation that we arrived in Granville at the end of its era as a self-sustaining community. And I personally would say that the loss of HUD Chevrolet was the first key blow in this gradual loss of self-sufficiency when it closed in late 1961 after 23 years in business. HUD Williams, the owner, had died of a heart attack, I think, and the dealership didn't allow his sons to continue it because they were too young. They were in their early 20s. But with faster modern roads and highways to take us to Newark and Columbus and Heath, and even the ability to order purchases on the internet, all of these business losses are hardly noticed today. But we are being well fed. So, wanted to thank several folks here for making all these presentations possible. Are there any questions? Any questions? Yes.
My understanding that when the fire hit the Wilson building that took out the bank, and the bank moved a vault into the old Isey house besides the Robin Museum, is that true?
No.
Well, yes and no. As
Well, it's
I,
not anymore.
I'm a lawyer, so I answer most questions yes and no. A bank vault was moved into the Heisey house, but that was in the early 19th century. It didn't have anything to do with the fire in the Wilson building. But there was a bank vault on the side of that building. You can still see it in the brickwork. But that was a long time before that.
Mhm.
One of my son Chris was a junior in high school. They planted trees down along New York and Granville Road, and we were planting a tree by Abe Florey's house, right on the corner there. And we found a interurban spike
Really?
out of one of the old rails. This spike is only about 4 inches long. So, and I think the interurban ran up that north side of
It did.
York and Granville Road.
That's exactly where it ran. Yeah, they installed the sidewalk along the north side of the North Granville Road after they pulled the interurban. But that's exactly where it went, along the north side of the North Granville Road.
Any other questions? Yes.
Will this be available to view later?
Yes, it's being recorded. Yeah. And I will have we'll have cover a lot of this territory in the next 2 or 3 issues of the Historical Times with additional information that we didn't have time to include today. So. Okay, Nanette, do you want to mention the next program, please? You probably got it in your head better.
Our next program is actually soon. We usually have a program once a month, and the March one is early in the run. So March 5th in the evening, Thursday evening, 7 o'clock, we're gonna have 2 Denison professors join us and talk to us about all the new tools historians have to study and teach history. So if you're interested in the vast topic, it'll be really interesting to hear how the field of history is changing with all the new tools, AI, all different tools that they have. So please join us.
Okay. And one last thing, if there are no more questions, we're going to pick up all these chairs and get them out of here. So if you want to stay around and check out all these comparative photos, but we'll get these chairs out of the way. Yes.
Of the newspapers themselves or recordings of the newspapers from all of those prior.
We have some issues of the Wanderer, the Licking Monitor, and the Intelligencer. And then the Granville Times is complete online. And then the Granville Sentinel is complete through 2011, and the library, our library, is updating those so that we'll, have it at least probably through last year. And I told them at the library, many of you remember the the Granville Booster. It came out and started in 1953. It was basically a shopper. Started out like this big, but it was full of ads. I don't know why the Granville Times was not able to continue. It closed in 1941. But I told them at the library that those need to be digitized because in between all those ads, there's bunches and bunches of news items and village and school board reports and stuff like that. So
I'll tell you a brief Granville Booster story. The back of the Granville Booster when we moved here was the advertisement for the Opera House movie theater. And it had those shows and the times and so forth. The telephone number which we were assigned was 1 digit off from the telephone number for the movie theater. And so we started getting fairly regular calls, and we'd say, no, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. And we'd tell them the right number. And after a while, my father said, look, this is going to be a lot easier. Let's just leave the booster right by the telephone. And so we did. And people would call, and we'd just tell them what time the movies were and what the shows were. And it was just easier than telling them to call someplace else. So.
Okay. Any last questions then? Yes.
When the party or the
Well, there were like brokers who purchased the warrants from Revolutionary War veterans and then collected them together and then offered them for sale. So these people, excuse me, in Granville, Massachusetts and Granby, Connecticut, purchased warrants for 7 quarter townships for 28,000 acres here. And so they bought them all at one time, though, so that they had a consolidated uh, place that they could come to.
Anyone else?
But why here? I mean, they wanted to come west.
They wanted to come west, and there were too many people and too many rocks in western Massachusetts for them to continue to farm there. So they were looking for newly available land, and this was in what was called the U.S. Military District, where all the land had been parceled out to Revolutionary veterans, and then people had paid those veterans probably pennies on the dollar for the land, and then they turned around and resold those warrants to people.
To
Yeah.
add to that, I understand that the people in New York who sold them the land, they were going to name the town after those guys, but then they found out how much profit they made and decided to name it after Granville.
Yes.
I was thinking about the Welsh. They were here before. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that come about?
Well, the same way, Marilyn, they acquired, but you're right, they were here first, and they bought the northeast quadrant of what is now Granville Township. And so they acquired the same way, though, the Revolutionary War veteran warrants that somebody had put together in the Welsh, or the earliest Welsh settlers bought those and settled the Welsh Hills area.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. All right.